Introducing Recorded Content, a podcast for small, scrappy B2B marketing teams who want to get the most out of podcasting. In each episode, we capture stories from industry experts and podcasters. Listen in and uncover what it takes to launch, run, and grow a successful B2B podcast. Check out and subscribe to the show on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows. Let's jump in.
Hey, this is Tristan. I'm the co-founder of Motion and your host for this episode of Recorded Content. Recorded Content is brought to you by Motion, a done-for-you podcast agency for small, scrappy B2B tech marketers. Every company in B2B benefits from running a podcast. It helps the company learn from customers, connect with influencers, and provide a perspective on what's happening in the industry. But most companies struggle to narrow in on their audience. A big mistake that I see, especially with companies who target different personas, is that their podcast is way too broad. It appeals to a general audience instead of really diving into what specific groups of customers really care about. In this episode, I have a conversation with Jacob Miller. Jacob is the marketing and brand manager at Headway, which is a company that helps startups launch new ventures through research-driven app design and development. I wanted to have Jacob on the show because he produces 3 different podcasts at Headway, and each show is tailored to a very specific audience with a specific purpose. I think Headway does a great job of segmenting their shows in a way that other companies can learn from. So let's jump into the interview. All right, cool. Well, Jacob, first things first, thanks for joining me on Recorded Content.
Yeah, happy to be here. Looking forward to it.
All right, awesome. Before we get into some of the things I have on my mind, I wanted to ask, I know your Twitter handle is Kinetic Bear. So I wanted to find out where in the world that came from. What's the origination of Kinetic Bear?
Yeah, so when I was in tech school, going for like video production, and at the time I was actually really interested in like motion graphics. So I was doing, film classes and motion graphics classes, and I was like, oh, like there's this idea of like kinetic energy within, creating videos or motion graphic projects. And I just like, I feel like I need to come up with an alias for myself on the internet because my name's very generic and there's a lot of Jacob Millers in this world. So I was like, how can I differentiate myself and just have a fun kind of alias too? And I really like bears, and that's basically it. So I did kinetic energy and bears together, and that's how it came to be. It's pretty simple, no weird story or anything, but that's it.
All right, cool. All right, so perfect. Like you mentioned, you're kind of this all-around creative, right? As I was doing some research on your background, saw you're into photography. You have music on your personal site that you're involved in. You're obviously, like you mentioned, your background is heavily related to motion graphics and video editing. So as this all-around creative, can you maybe outline why strong creative is important to startups and technology companies like the folks that you work with at Headway?
Yeah, I think, a lot of people throw around the word storytelling in especially in B2B or B2C or whatever industry you're in, really. Obviously it's important, but I think a lot of people don't actually take the time to understand what that means and how that actually applies to their customers, their business. And the one thing with stories is that, they're really specific, right? There's a specific character, there's a specific problem, there's a specific outcome that they want, for themselves. There's somebody that gets involved in their life that helps them, potentially get to that outcome. And that's really I think to understand all of those things, it's important to have a sense of, creativity. And again, the word creativity or be creative is such a vague term. But I think that you have to have a kind of a understanding across the board of how you can use one. I think the most foundational thing is writing and talking to customers, doing these interviews, learning how to ask better questions and unpack their own story. Because if you can understand the stories of your customers, you can then create, better messaging on your website. You can create better content that they actually care about and want to read or listen to or watch a video. I think that being a creative is a multifaceted thing. And I think for me, it's been more personal of a thing to be interested in a bunch of things. Not everybody's like that. Some people like to be deep in one, like in video, only in video. Like they're really deep into that, and that's totally fine. But I'm just like wired in a way, like I probably have, ADHD or something, was never diagnosed, but I love just diving in. I did screen printing for a while, like just random stuff, spoon carving, because I'm just really interested in all these different like tools and processes and stuff. And all these things give me a fresh perspective on how I can tell better stories and understand why people do things. Like, why do they make decisions? Like, why do they choose this over that? Like, there's a lot there. And if you have all these different tools you can pull from, because every market and every customer is different, you could then have these different things you can grab and apply to your marketing and apply to your business to get better results. That's kind of how I see it.
Yeah, I love it. And I kind of share some of that with you as well, where, my background, I started a video production company, almost around the same time as YouTube came out. So, I'm like this old Kinetic bear, maybe,
Nice.
I've been around for a while but yeah, I started with video and that primary storytelling medium that a lot of people reference, but there's so much that you get from just that storytelling process, like you said, which is, taking a look at the types of questions that you ask in that story arc and what you want to get from someone's journey and how you want to tell it. So there are a lot of different ways to do that. And today we'll talk about how podcasting is used at Headway. But before we do that, can you talk about the specific types of folks that Headway does work with predominantly?
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting because we've been in this kind of shift internally with our positioning at Headway. We used to kind of serve startups that are looking to launch new products or grow their product that they've already put it into market. But we were also for a while doing, projects with corporations, like innovation teams that wanted to create new revenue streams for these large companies. But we found that we align better with the founders and the startups because it just gets us more excited. We're really good at that part. And it is like an exciting world. So like that, it gives us energy. And I think that's something that is really important about any business is like, if it drains you, if your own business drains you, like that's not good. So yeah, we've been switching over to focusing on founders specifically. So we don't necessarily we have experience in certain verticals such as healthcare, fintech, stuff like that, logistics, supply chain, but we found that our process and approach is very agnostic, and there's a lot of folks that still come to us that like are a good fit to work with us, but don't always fit in an industry that we've done before. Because they have the expertise in the industry, but we have the expertise in building a business, not just a product that actually makes money and is like a feasible thing. So,
which is crazy with a lot of startups. Making money is sometimes a foreign concept, right?
Yeah, we something that we've been kind of throwing around. It's not we didn't create this phrase, but minimum viable business instead of minimum viable product, because a product doesn't mean money. Like you can make a product, but if no one buys it, it's not a business. So the whole idea is like we help people launch minimum viable businesses through like we do use the lean startup approach, but we also have been experimenting with different methods as well. So,
all right. And so with those customers, Headway has several different types of podcasts that you all have created, right? And you're even doing live streams that I've seen on a recurring basis. So there's a lot of different dynamic formats that you're using. So when did Headway get started in podcasting?
Yeah, so Andrew had Seaworthy, which is his podcast, which is focused on like building successful software. It was kind of general. Like, so he would talk with founders, he would talk with design leaders, because he was really plugged into the design leadership community on Twitter from just back in like the early 2010. So when Twitter first launched, he was in there and he was making all these connections, and it helped him get initial projects for Headway too. But he started Seaworthy by himself and had, I don't know, like 10 episodes before I even joined Headway 4 years ago. And since then, we only added, I think, 12 more episodes, which is okay. But it's, again, he's been in the middle of reevaluating what is the Seaworthy podcast, who does it serve. And so we're kind of like in the planning stages of relaunching it with a new new positioning, so it's like more attractive and focuses on the right people with the needs that we can provide. So
Okay. So we have Seaworthy. Sounds like that was the 1st one. Andrew started with that one, even before you were there. And then there are 2 others. We have Even Keeled and Exploring Product, right? So can you tee up those, what they are and the audiences that they're related to?
Yeah, so the second podcast that came out was Even Keeled, and that was that's headed up by John, our CTO. So it's mainly focused on software development, and mostly on like the mindset and approach when it comes to problem solving with development, whether it's project management or, you know, growing your development team, like mentorship and pair programming and all those different concepts, retrospectives. That's kind of the core of it. It hasn't we haven't put too many episodes out. Again, it's one of those things where, you know, I think when you have a leadership team involved in a show, sometimes they want to own it more than your team will own it. So John's an audiophile. He used to do music production and recording and mixing and stuff. So he loves the editing part. And so it's kind of like in his hands, like how he wants to grow that show. And that's okay. We definitely support it and help it grow and market it. But we haven't had any new shows with that or episodes with that lately. But that's the second one.
Okay. So we have
it's something
Even
that we
Keel.
want to, Even Keel. We want to revamp it. But again, it's like, it's in John's hands at this point. And that's, you know, not necessarily focused so much on getting more clients. We found that show actually is like has a positive signal on people that are applying to work at Headway, because we're constantly recruiting like developers, designers, and product strategists to our team. So that helps us, like, you know, get higher quality leads for recruitment. And then the last show that we just launched this past January is Exploring Product, and that one's focused on bringing a new product to market, validating your product idea, or maybe like you do have your product in market and now you're going to grow it. So it's all about exploring the complexities of bringing a product to life and what that can feel like how there's really no, you know, blueprint like for everybody. Like it kind of, you know, pulls the curtain open and says, hey, nobody really knows what they're doing when it comes to innovation. And that's okay. We're here together to talk about it, to figure it out together, to learn as we go and share what we're learning, talk about processes and approach and mental models and all that stuff that you can use to hopefully close the gap between what you think is true and what is actually true. Like that's kind of like about your product. So that's kind of the scope of that show. That's hosted with 2 people. So Ryan and Robert co-host that show. And that was the first show that we decided to do live stream with it. So the interviews are actually live, so people can kind of tune in on YouTube and they can ask questions if they want. We kind of hold questions till the end to keep the interview flow going. We don't want to, like, you know, cut in too much. But it's been a really, really fun experience for everybody.
Awesome. So with these 3 shows, so you started with the first one, Seaworthy, and that was in place before you were there. So what sparked the second show? You know, at what point did you say, hey, we're going to launch a different one to a different audience, which was more on the recruiting side? That was on the software development side, right? Versus the founder type interview based show, which was Seaworthy. So what sparked that development of that second show?
I think it was always something we wanted to do. Like, hey, we want to do a show that's focused on software development. And it was on the back burner for a long time. And then we've just finally said, hey, we're going to take the jump and make it happen. Really didn't have a like super crazy, like fleshed out plan. We're just like, let's just bring it to life and see what happens. And I think that's true even with Exploring Product. Like, let's not overthink it. Let's like get a brand going, you know, a simple brand guideline for it, start recording shows or episodes and just like go with it. And I think with Even Keeled, I don't know if the intention originally was fully, hey, it's for recruitment. It's like we just have always been making software development content on our blog. And then we were having like before COVID, we were having local meetups in our office. So like developers and designers, we had different ones. We had Wisconsin UX, which is a user experience focused one. And then we had React.js Green Bay, which was focused on React.js developers. And so every month we'd have a different speaker and like, you know, networking and pizza and all that kind of stuff. And people loved it. And so then that kind of set, you know, we kind of migrated from the in-person thing to going fully online with every aspect of our business with those meetups. So.
And Jacob, you mentioned that it was important to just get a brand started and to build some momentum there. So as a creative person, like where do you find that balance between getting a project rolling or overthinking it to the point of you can't actually execute on it?
Yeah, it's funny because I was just in a meeting this morning talking about, hey, we have to get this thing figured out together. And everyone just, you know, and it's normal to be like, oh, well, we could do this. And you start, you know, well, we'll put this together. We have this, and this. Yeah. I'm like, well, we have 2 weeks. Like, that sounds great. Let's consider that phase 2. What's like version 1? What's like the, you know, people say, what's the MVP of this thing? So again, it's like, it's something that we've been forcing ourselves to do more and more because it's easy for us to like get our heads in the clouds because we have a ton of ideas for like content and shows. And like, you know, there was a point where Andrew wanted to rent a bus and have us like drive around and interview a bunch of founders, right? Like there's all these ideas that we always have, but we always have to think like, okay, well, what's doable now to kind of like prove that this could work? And obviously with shows, like it's not overnight, it's not within a month. Like the results of that show are kind of this evergreen growing thing. It's like, you know, 6 to 12 months kind of results. But I think for us, like we have to like in meetings, okay, hold up, let's take a step back and like, what's like actually doable right now? Like, what do we know we can do? And then just to get that out and done, like just ship it and then improve on it after. Again, because we do that for our clients, and a lot of times we forget about that for ourselves. Yeah. And it's one of those things because we're all so personally attached to the business and, you know, and the services we offer. Like whether you're a designer or developer or you're a marketer here, like we all like have really great ideas and we all get excited. But it's always like, hey, let's remember that like we need to follow the mindset that we give to our clients and that approach, and like let's apply it to ourselves. And it's finally starting to happen. And again, we're also in this position of the company where we now actually have like a full marketing team where it was mostly just me before for about a year or two. And then slowly folks started getting added to the marketing team to help it kind of grow. And then now it's like we actually are cross-functional. We're actually collaborating with our product strategists that do client work, but they're starting to help us like reconfigure our messaging. They're helping us with customer research. We're interviewing founders, all that kind of stuff. So we're now more collaborative, where before it was like, hey, marketing's going to get this done. We were kind of in silos, but we're not really. But now we're like actually like meeting every week and like talking about the things that we're working on together, instead of like dividing and conquering, regrouping and being like, wait, what is this? Like all of a sudden, you know what I mean? Yeah. So it's something that we're working on and we're getting better at it. And it's starting to get really fun because we're actually like getting through like the feedback loops faster because we're actually like being intentional about meeting and getting the information we need to make those changes on the feedback and stuff.
Yeah. And Jacob, you mentioned it's now getting really fun. So what about that feedback loop makes it more fun to create from your perspective?
Yeah. So for example, like if we were to like mock up like a landing page or like, hey, we met on the thing, we kind of scoped out the landing page and then, you know, marketing team's going to go work on it for a couple days and then we'll come back or a day or two. But like now we're starting to be more collaborative of like more, I guess, I'm trying to think, more scrappy about stuff. And it's kind of fun because people that have ideas, like you just never know who's going to have like a cool idea or a better idea as we're like, oh yeah, that's such a better way to say that. Or, oh, I never thought about that. Like you can get to those like different perspectives faster because we're like in these, like we're like in Miro or we're using FigJam or Figma and we're just in there and we can like also async, like give feedback too. So instead of like, you know, assigning tasks, separating for a few days, coming back, every day we're like, you know, sharing the Figma file, sharing a Loom video, like, hey, here's some feedback on what I think about this. What do you think? They'll reply with a Loom video because not everybody can meet at the same time sometimes. So you just do your best to like make that work. So I think, again, it's like just faster feedback, which actually makes it more fun because you're like, you can spend less time going in the wrong direction, right? It's like that's kind of why. And I think I just love people, so I think I get energy like being around folks that I don't always engage with every single day. So it's good for me to like kind of get those touch points from, you know, a product strategist, you know, even our CEO, and even designers and all that kind of stuff. So it's always like good to be involved in that more often than we used to be.
Yeah, and you talked about less time in the wrong direction. I think that's an interesting perspective there, and we experience it too. I almost feel like when you and it almost goes back to your minimal viable business. It's almost like a minimal viable podcast. Like how can you get to that level where it's comfortable to release? And I feel like you do get energy when you ship, right? And when you're getting some content out there. Whereas if you take so long to get something out, I feel like people will just get tired of the concept. And it's like, damn, we haven't released that episode yet, or that, you know, this hasn't gone out to the public, and people will get fatigued with the whole idea. Whereas if it has momentum and you're getting it out and you're making those iterations and refinements, then you really just find that you're getting more involvement. But what's your perspective on that?
Yeah, I think, you know, can you ask the question again? I'm sorry. I feel like I heard it weird.
Yeah. I was just wondering, you know, I find when you do release more, right, and you get that feedback loop, and you build some momentum, right? So where it's almost like you're able to integrate more ideas and build more collaboration when you go through that process, versus if you wait so long to release something, it's almost like people start to fall off, and it's like, oh, okay, that thing takes forever to get out there, and it's just not worth it.
Got it. Okay. Sorry. So I think there's something to be said about just building that muscle of like actually, like you were saying, shipping, because a lot of people are really good at like, you know, getting ideas to like almost done. But then actually, and I actually have this problem with in like personal projects that I would do. Like I have so many songs that I've written but never published, like on hard drives and stuff. And people always ask, why don't you publish? I'm like, I don't think it's that great. So I think there's like part of it where it's like, as like Donald Miller says, the curse of knowledge. Like we think that like we're always like putting our own selves like up to this high standard. Like, oh, if I create content, it's got to like wow myself. But it's always easy to forget that a lot of customers don't know the things we know, or any people for that matter, don't know the things that we know. And it's important for us to share those things. And we don't really know what people value until we actually put it in front of them. Yeah. So the faster you can put more things in front of them, the faster you can understand, again, less direction in the wrong direction, or less time in the wrong direction, more time in places that you know people care about. I think too, I think we talked about this before, was the idea of consistency and like staying top of mind with a show. And this is something that I think that we struggle with and we need to make better, is like, just obviously there's quantity versus quality conversation, but when it comes to a show, if you're not like creating new content every week, people are just going to forget that, oh, maybe they listened to a couple episodes and like, oh, it was great. And then they go through all your episodes and then you don't have another episode for like a month. Yeah. And the odds of them remembering you in 30 days, not that great. Like, and I think about myself, like, hey, I subscribed to a newsletter, and all of a sudden you get an email 30 days later and you're like, wait, what is this? Right? You just don't even remember what it's from. So I think it's even true with a podcast, where there's this consistency that's required to build that momentum. Obviously, like, you could do an episode a month, and over 2 years you'd have 24 episodes that are like maybe 30 to 60 minutes, but that's a long time. You know, when it comes to your business, you got to like get results this quarter, this year, right? So obviously podcasts can be evergreen. But I think there's something to be said about momentum, staying top of mind with your clients or with your customers. And I think that at least once a week is probably the best approach. And when it comes to that, like remove, or I'm not sure how to phrase this, either remove or create constraints that allow you to do that. So some people, overthink the idea of doing an interview, or they overthink the idea of like, I need this fancy microphone, all this stuff. Like there's folks like Tim Ferriss that are just like using like AirPods or using whatever, like they don't, or the whole interview, these guests that are super famous, and these super famous people don't have a microphone at home. Like they're just on their computer, like with crappy earbuds or whatever.
That's right.
But people still care to listen to it. Right. So again, quality's great, but the actual context of the episodes is what's really important. And that's what people get attracted to. And again, you can, if you validate that the show is like making your current customers happier, or it's attracting new customers, or it's just creating this sense of community that you can learn from this group of people if you're able to somehow have a place for them to meet, like whether it's a Circle app or Slack channel or something for your show, that you have an opportunity for people to discuss the episodes. You can also learn like what you should talk about next on your show, which is really interesting too, to think about. And that's something we're thinking about too, is like, how can we build some kind of our own community of founders that we can like tap into to learn like, hey, what's new and happening in the world of founders? Like, what's your problem? What are your problems this week? Like, how are you struggling? What do you wish you could do? All these things that we could learn. And whether they're engaging with us or engaging with other people, like learning what they really care about and what's hurting them is really what you should be talking about on your show.
Yeah, and I've seen some customers and just other folks we've talked with. It's almost like the podcast can serve as this foundation for a community. How do you feel about that as you bring on guests in this, kind of sphere of influence that you're working around? Do you feel like it helps to nurture this, the starting phases of a community?
Yeah, because I wouldn't say we have a community yet, because I think there's a clear difference between audience and community. An audience is like, people that listen to the show, subscribe to your YouTube channel, subscribe to your newsletter. That's an audience. That's not a community. Community is when there's actual engagement and people are starting to actually like become leaders in that group and like lead each other, help each other grow. Like that's community, where like you're not the only person. If you're just like shouting things out into this like community board that you have, like if you have Slack or you use Circle or something, and if you're the only person providing value, like that, I guess that can be okay. But the idea of a community is to like basically empower the people there to serve each other and grow together. Like that's like really what it's about. And you're just there to help guide that growth, guide that engagement, empower people to lead each other and grow together. And also you just get to kind of like see what people are talking about with each other. Oh, wow. I never would have thought to ask that. Oh, right. Look, like they're conversing. Oh, we should make an episode about this topic, or we should make a article about this topic, or whatever it may be. Those are the things that, it's like, again, audience versus community. Community is great. And I'm excited to get in that direction, but we're not quite there yet. And I know it's going to be, communities are tough. Like I know that's especially now more than ever, there's a lot of communities. And so I think now more than ever, it's also important to be super specific and to filter high quality members, because free communities can be great, but there can be a lot of toxic conversations that happen. It can feel spammy sometimes. So I think like the paid communities are definitely worth it if they provide value, but paid communities usually create a filter for quality members versus not. So
definitely. And Jacob, you mentioned, creating a community is tough for sure. But you also talked about that, your team struggles on the consistency side. So I was wondering, in a lot of, customers go through this, people we talk to, consistency is a frequent obstacle on the podcasting side. So what do you think, what are some of your biggest barriers at Headway, do you think?
Yeah, I think we set the standards like too high in a weird way. Like not that because quality is a part of our brand, like just quality design and quality development, like all that kind of stuff, quality visuals. So I think, we try to set a bar for ourselves, but we also need to remember that, again, going back to the founder's mindset that we talk about, like be scrappy and just to prove something and get it moving and get it going. So like, I think we need to like remove the barriers that like, why are we not doing a show a week? like ask ourselves that question and talk to the host that's involved, talk to your team and say, hey, why do you feel like it's hard to do that every week? Like, why do you personally feel like it would be hard? And really just understand like why. Like, so if you have a CEO that you're trying to get to do a show, ask them like, hey, why do you think this is hard? And what is there anything I could do to help you do that better? And the other thing too is like, what are we doing right now that isn't working anymore? Or maybe it never worked. Maybe you just assumed that we should be doing this in marketing. Like we have a presence on every single marketing platform except for TikTok. It's like TikTok is great, but it's like if you divide yourselves across all these platforms, like you can't focus on each one very well, right? So we're actually in the middle of thinking about like doing an audit of like, okay, what channels are we in? Which ones do we feel like are worth our time like this year or this quarter, and say, hey, and I'm feeling more Twitter, LinkedIn for Headway versus Instagram, Facebook, because it's just like we'll probably still maintain those social pages there and just have normal updates, but we're going to do a bigger push into LinkedIn and Twitter with like micro content, such like shorter videos that are from all of our podcasts, from our YouTube presentations that we have up, because there's so many great little clips within all these like 30 to 40 minute presentations, because people, I don't want to watch a 40-minute presentation, but if you can show them a little bit of value and get curiosity, then they'll like go to your site or go to your YouTube channel and be like, oh, I'm so glad I dove deeper into this, and again, it's like, how do you catch their attention? And so for us, I think it's that audit of like, hey, if you want to make a show important, that means stop spending time over here so you can actually spend time over here. And those are hard decisions. Like they're not easy to make. Like, oh, well, we've been doing this forever. It's going to feel weird if we don't do it anymore. Or you might have some people like, well, this person's on Facebook and always comments on our stuff. But then ask the question, does that person actually impact your business? Right? It's or does that, thing, it's like, those are the hard questions. But again, I think it comes down to like, you have to make it important. And that means sometimes saying no to other things. And so that's the hard conversations I need to have is like, hey, how can we make this easier? Or what if the episodes were shorter? That's another thing I've been thinking about. Like we currently do these 30 to 60 minute interviews. What if we just had like these kind of like topic discussions with our own teams? We're no longer relying on finding a guest. We can just build up this library of all these topics that we're passionate about and know a lot about and just talk about, and just have like 5 to 15 minute episodes that are just discussions, sharing our perspective, our mindset, things that we've tried and learned over the years with different founders and startups. So that's something I've been thinking about, is like, how can we kind of just make it easier? And again, it's just like changing, what does an episode look like? Hell, maybe there's 3 different types of episodes we do. There's a guest interview. There's a short, quick, like topic discussion that's like snackable. And maybe the other one's like just like a longer form, one person perspective talking about something. Again, it's like, maybe there's not 3, maybe there's just 2, but like figure that out. Like how can you make it easier? 1 guest interview per month. And then every other week is just like a short discussion with different folks in our team talking about topics that your customers care about.
Yeah. I love that different format piece. And I think that is a way to unlock kind of that consistency issue. And we even do it ourselves at Motion with our own shows. We do a founder series where it's just my business partner and I, and we're kind of riffing back and forth on something that a customer asked us or something we saw on Twitter or LinkedIn. And we kind of build out an episode, but they're shorter. We don't go for 45 minutes, the 2 of us. We're going for 15 to 20 minutes. And then we reformat that and repackage it in a lot of different ways. So I think that's a really smart way to still keep that consistency going, but you don't have those barriers where you're coordinating with guests, and that does create some friction sometimes. If you had that guest or 2 lined up and something happened, you had to push it out, then it's like, oh damn, I'm going to miss my date. And so I think if you have that fail-safe format in place where you can at least maybe even have a small library of those in development, then you can kind of fill in those gaps there. And that leads to a question too. With Headway, there's 3 shows there. They're all hosted by different folks. So what are your thoughts on how the podcasting really unlocks collaboration across different departments of the organization? Like, how does that work at Headway?
Yeah. I mean, our marketing team basically works with almost everybody, and we have like 37 employees, I think, at this moment. So whether it's article, creating blog posts or creating these shows or these YouTube presentations that we do, it's very collaborative. And I think, again, going back to like, I like that. I actually really like working with all these different types of people. It can feel chaotic at times, but again, the way that we've made it less chaotic is actually having a clear process that we've documented. Everyone understands their responsibilities. Everybody understands the timelines and the workflows of how it all works. We've created templates for reaching out to guests, templates for following up, saying thank you. The process behind sending a thank you gift out in the physical. We actually send a physical mail thank you gift to this person. Again, I think a lot of it's like having clarity on like how does it work every single time you do it. What's the process? Who's involved and who owns what? And that's how we've, and this has been a more recent thing with exploring product, because, hey, we have more shows. And Ryan and Robert are also like, very like process oriented people. Like they want to know the workflow. Like they had questions. Well, wait, when does this happen? Or how do we do that? So we're like, hey, let's like map this out. And we started to apply that to all the shows, and every show has a little bit of a different editing process, because like I said, John loves to edit his episodes in Descript, which is totally fine. But for the most part, like the outreach, the follow-up, how we record and everything is basically the same. So I think having that consistent process is super helpful, and having clear communication across the teams. And we have channels in Slack dedicated to each show. So like, hey, you can take this person in the channel and say, hey, I have this update on this thing for the show. Oh, this person said yes, let's they'll interview, but we need to pick a date still. What's the availability for next month? Okay, cool. We can't do these days because there's already other presentations happening on YouTube. Okay, blah, 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 blah. So again, it's you provide that space, that specific space to have conversations about that show, because we hardly use email to communicate internally. Like we never do. I can't remember the last time I sent an email to anybody at Headway. It's all in Slack, and we have dedicated channels to each type of project or type of thing, or team. So that allows us to kind of stay on track and understand what the question's about, and also creates transparency across the team because they can see the conversations that individuals are having.
Yeah, you're speaking my language here, Jacob. We have a rule: we can't send internal emails in Motion.
It's so easy to get lost in your emails. So yeah,
it is. And then the thread functionality of Gmail and everything. You can't even tell where you are in the process. So I love the Slack piece for each show. We do something very similar. What else is part of the nuts and bolts of that process? Like, where do you document things? Do you have Asana or Monday or something like that in place, or what else is involved?
Yeah, so documentation is in Notion, and then we track tasks in Asana. So Asana will link to Notion documentation. So and then we also have we might do some note taking in Notion for episodes, but mostly because Ryan's a visual thinker for the show, so he'll be doing the interview, and then I or Robert or someone else on the team will be listening to these interviews and in Miro and just have these little note cards and take notes through the whole interview. And what's cool about Miro, I didn't know this until recently, is that you can see the time at which the little card was created. So we can actually reference that to the time in the recording. And so when Amanda's going to pull clips out or find quotes from the show, she can actually reference all their notes in there to quickly get to the best clips, which is pretty cool. I know there's other tools out there for taking notes for your show and everything, but we found that it's just easier that way for us. And so we're using Miro for actually during that show, and we actually retrospective on what did we learn from this interview and how can we apply it to what we're doing at Headway. So yeah, Asana for task tracking, Notions for documentation. We have mapped out the workflow in Miro as well. Hey, here's how the whole podcasting workflow works. Here's step 1, step 2, who's involved when. It shows the whole thing, so you can just see it in a big overview of who's all involved and when and how it gets done. So we have that.
And that's that virtual whiteboard, right? You're talking about with me? Okay, yeah, we've used that before. Yeah,
FigJam's a similar tool. It's newer through Figma. But yeah, Miro has been amazing for just even brainstorming for us for things. So
yeah. Love it. And if you had to go back, so now that you have three of these launched and they've all gone through that initial phase, that pilot one, what would you do
Mm,
differently if you had to go back and create, let's say, the second show again, which was even keeled?
yeah.
Is there anything that you would do differently there? Would you have a different, more in-depth brief? Would you launch sooner? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, sooner's always better, right? It's like
Right.
time's on your side, just like stocks, right? It's like, hey, invest earlier because you get the outcome sooner, or all that kind of stuff. Um, but I think I don't think there's really a good way for that to have been better because again, it's like John's show. Um, and again, like he definitely wants to do it, but it just became a priority thing. Like, hey, he's the CTO, and we have to do a lot of hiring, and again, it's more of a business decision than anything, and I
Yeah.
get that. That's tough. People like again, make sure your business is healthy first. Like whether it's your revenue or your team, and and retain that team, and then do the stuff later. And I get it can be really hard. But I think, and then when you feel like you're in a better spot, then you can do it. Obviously, like we could make it easier, but there just hasn't been interviews scheduled or things for that show. And I think it just comes down to his capacity, and that's okay. Like there's nothing wrong with that. Okay, so he's not available. Who else is? Oh, let's start exploring product, right? It's like
Hmm.
that's kind of another reason why the third show started. It was, hey, even keeled's kind of on pause, but what if we did something else? And we're going to be launching a design podcast specifically. So our head of design, Billy, will be doing a new show focused on design, and we're actually going to be having a whole design community type thing set up in the future that we'll be launching. So yeah, so that's something that we're planning for. And again, some of it's timing, some of the things going along because there's design courses we want to try experimenting with and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I don't know.
And with those, so you got design, on the horizon here. So what is the
Mm.
advantage, the primary advantage for you now that you've seen several of these shows, of having them in different feeds, tailored towards very specific audiences versus perhaps putting this all in one Headway feed, where you have a lot of different shows, might alternate themes each week. Like what's the thought process there?
Yeah, I think being more specific and like niching down to specific segments is a really great thing because it's like this whole idea of like if you generalize what you're saying, nobody cares. But if you're really specific about a certain topic or problem, somebody will care. And that somebody is hopefully the segment that you're going after, right? So I think for us, as much as it can sound like a little overwhelming to have like multiple shows, if you have, again, it's a little scrappy at the beginning, but once you kind of figure out, okay, here's how it works, now let's document it. Okay, let's make this better. Okay, this actually feels like it takes too long. How can we fix this? Or maybe this person isn't the right person for this thing. Who else can do it? All those different things. I think the idea of being more specific, you don't have to have 4 shows like us. Like that's definitely not, I'm not recommending that to anybody, but you can have more than one. You can
Yeah.
have more than one. And I think generalizing your audience is worse than picking a really specific one. Cause again, it's like, nobody really cares if you're generalizing. And also like nobody can connect to it because they want to find, like when it comes to a show, like they want to find a place to be like, oh, these are my people, right? Like they want to hear, like when I listen to State of Demand Gen by Chris Walker,
Hmm.
every time I hear him talk or I hear the folks on the show like asking questions, I'm like, these are my people. Like I'm like, oh, yep, I have that problem too, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
So if you generalize and have like, say like, if we were to do one show, say Seaworthy was like, each week we did different topics and week 1 was design, week 2 was development, week 3 was product, and then week 4 was like corporate innovation. Like that would be the weirdest. Like again, it's like, yeah, we're putting out episodes each week, but like the designer's waiting a whole month for another episode for them, right? It's just like,
Yeah.
wait, what is this? Like this show is like about everything. I don't know. Like I guess Joe Rogan's the only person can get away
Yeah,
with
they can be
that.
all over the place. Yeah.
But his gimmick, his hook is that he's Joe Rogan. People
Yeah.
want to tune into Joe Rogan, and obviously you could probably say, hey, has specific topics that he usually caters to, usually it's like fitness, or sports, and then like psychedelics and weird history,
Right.
like stuff like that. But anyway, like the idea is that like you have to kind of like, if you aren't famous, you don't have leverage. So the leverage is then speaking to specific people with a specific problem. So yeah.
Yeah. I love that. And yeah, I mean, I think the one rule I usually like put forth is, if you're trying to think about when to create another show, like if you have two things that are really off topic towards different audiences or a broad audience, you might get one or two strikes. But if someone hasn't found an episode that's really tailored towards them, they're like, I'm going to unsubscribe. This thing doesn't need to be in my feed. And there you've lost a listener.
I actually unsubscribed from the Story Brand podcast because I was like, it was so like, it's a good show, but I kind of was just like lost interest because they're just talking to so many different people, so many different backgrounds. And it was all about the Story Brand framework, which is like the connecting point, but it's speaking to so many different types of people. And I'm just like, and it's kind of lost interest. And so I think that's actually a really good example of a show that like, it just didn't make sense. And again, we definitely have a lot to work on. Like our shows are not perfect by any means.
Yeah.
Not like I'm saying all these things and I'm listening to myself and saying, yeah, we should talk about that like next week or whatever.
But that's what it's about.
So,
You have to look at yourself sometimes too, but I think you're right there.
Yeah.
So as a, kind of go full circle here to the top when we mentioned that, you're like this really all around creative and that appeals to you, right? Photography, writing, design. What about the podcasting medium jumps out at you? Like what's your favorite thing about that compared to maybe other disciplines?
Yeah, I think on a personal level, I've just always been an audiophile. Like I was a musician first, like when I got out of high school, almost went for audio engineering type of career and I decided not to. I was like, well, I like photography is kind of cool. And then like, I don't know, it just kind of like evolved over time. But I think with a podcast, and now more than ever, you can do a video podcast, which is like more achievable than it was ever before. Before audio was definitely, I feel like even 10 years ago, podcasts were hard to do. Like I remember launching my own photography podcast and like, this was like 2013 or something. And it was just like finding hosting was weird. Like, okay, how do I build a website for this? Like it was, there just weren't the services available that are now in the products. So hosting was just kind of funky. I remember like hosting it on Bluehost, like, and then serving it up through WordPress. And then like I had it connected. It was just so weird. And now it's a lot easier. So I think for me, I'm an audiophile. I love like the audio format. Like I think about like why I love podcasts, and it's like I can listen to it. There's no barrier to listening to it. Like I can listen to it when I drive. I can listen to it when I'm biking or running, on a walk with my dog. I could listen to it while I'm cooking. Like it's like, it's kind of like the best medium, that you can do in a weird way. And I think it also creates constraints because like you don't have to worry about video. You don't have to like have a good camera or whatever. Like it actually removes like some of these barriers and be like, okay, you need a microphone, you need a computer, and you need somebody to talk to or something to talk about. Like that's it. And then you just go to a tool like Transistor or Simplecast or whatever, and you just open an account, pay a monthly fee, and you can publish your podcast. And it's like, that's it. Like that's, it's like, I think the cool thing about audio is that it's super shareable. Like, hey, check out this episode. Like I'll share episodes that I've been listening to with friends and stuff. Videos, obviously you can share YouTube video, but again, maybe, I guess you can share anything with anybody at this point, like articles and everything. But I don't know. I just think that it's one of those formats that a lot of people can get a lot out of without like the barriers of like, you can't watch a video while you're driving or whatever, or taking your run. So it's like, I think it's access and it's just, I don't know, it's fun. I don't know. That's like the best way I can describe it.
I love it. And last question for you, because a lot of people wrestle with this, is when is the right time to create a podcast? And I know Headway had one even before you started, and then you've created more since then. I mean, when do you feel like the time is right?
I mean, today, I guess, right? Yesterday, I guess is the thought. I mean, it's funny because I tried launching my own show last year, and I kind of it was 2020, and I recorded like 18 episodes, or recorded 10, and then it started editing, and then I recorded more, and I have like 10 episodes I haven't published yet or edited, and I don't know, it's just like one of those things where like, oh, I wish I would have just stuck with it, because I regret not keeping it going. But part of the struggle for me was like, I didn't feel like I figured out the premise of the show. Like it was just more of a, oh, I think this would be cool, but like if I actually want this to be something bigger than me, like I need to like think about like who it's serving, who it's helping, like why do people care about what I have to say or what these people that I'm talking to have to say. So it's actually been something I've been thinking about revisiting. And again, it's like, and especially after going through all these things with my team on like how to make the process better, it's like, oh, I can actually do the same thing I did last year, but like faster now, because I know like I don't have to waste time doing this or that or overthink these things. But I think now, or, you know, obviously yesterday was the best day, but just start planning today and like set a date. Like, I think when you create that like kind of like timeline deadline tension, it actually forces you to like get it done and make it important. Because if you just kind of say it, but don't actually like, Scott, our sales coach, he's like, all right, what's step one? I'm like, well, we have to do that. He's like, no. Like step one, put time on your calendar to talk, to plan, to make a plan. Like that's step one.
Yeah.
Like, so it's like, okay, yeah. That like simplify the steps, like make it super tangible steps, not like, oh, well, we got to do this and blah, blah, blah. Like, no. Like put time on the calendar to actually plan it out, and then do step one after that. Right. It's such a simple concept, and we always like get caught up in like, well, blah, 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 or you just get distracted and doing a bunch of research, but you never actually do anything about it.
Yeah, perfect. I love that. Just take that first step, you know, get that calendar invite out there, commit to spending the time. That's a good recommendation there. Well, Jacob, you know, I appreciate you being on the show, but before we jump off here, where can people go to find more about Kinetic Bear and Headway?
So I'm on Twitter, Kinetic Bear, just one word. LinkedIn is, if you do /Kinetic Bear, that's my user profile. You can find Jacob Miller at Headway. And then you just learn, if you want to learn more about Headway, headway.io. We also have a YouTube channel, Headway on YouTube. I mean, check out the shows, check out all our videos and articles and stuff. And I'm pretty active on Twitter, so if you reach out to me, I'll follow up and reach back. So yeah.
Yep, I vouch that is true. That's how we got connected, was on Twitter. So
that's true.
Awesome. Well, Jacob, thanks for joining me on Recorded Content today.
Awesome. Thanks.